Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're talking about something you probably have on your desk right now, but it holds a pretty high-stakes secret. We are talking about a material so completely fundamental to our world that if it vanished tomorrow, it could trigger a genuine global collapse.
All right, let's just start with a really simple, kind of weird experiment. You know that if you heat most things, say a piece of plastic, the atoms start vibrating like crazy, the material gets weaker, and it stretches out. But if you do the same thing to a stretched rubber band, something else happens entirely.
Yeah, it actually shrinks. It pulls back with more force the hotter it gets. And this bizarre little property is our first clue to why this material is both totally irreplaceable and, as you're about to see, a source of unbelievable vulnerability for all of us.
And look, that is not me being dramatic. That's a direct quote from an expert talking about what would happen if we lost our main supply of natural rubber. The consequences would be, well, apocalyptic. Okay, let's get into this.
So, to really understand this massive risk, we first have to get our heads around the molecular magic that makes rubber so incredibly special.
Right, so natural rubber is a polymer, and the best way to picture it is just a chaotic, jumbled mess of super long spaghetti-like chains. I mean, we're talking so long that if each atom in a single chain was the size of a tennis ball, that chain could stretch for miles.
So, why is it so stretchy? Well, it's basically a constant molecular tug-of-war. See, those long chains are always being jostled and bombarded by the molecules around them, and that keeps them all tangled up. When you stretch a rubber band, you're forcing those chains into a neat, orderly line. But here's the thing, the universe just prefers chaos. So the second you let go, that constant bombardment kinks the chains right back up, and the band snaps back. And that's also why heating it makes it contract. More heat means more bombardment, which means an even stronger pull back to its jumbled up state.
But here's the problem. In its raw form, right out of the tree, rubber is basically useless. I mean, the first people who tried making waterproof coats found out the hard way when their new jackets melted into this foul-smelling sludge on the first hot day. This one massive flaw led to one of history's greatest accidental discoveries.
And this brings us to the human story at the center of all this. It's the story of Charles Goodyear, a guy who became completely obsessed with fixing rubber's fatal flaw.
Goodyear was, well, relentless. He was absolutely convinced he could solve this problem, even as his obsession drove his family into total financial ruin. He was in and out of debtor's prison so many times he actually started calling it his hotel. But he never, ever stopped experimenting, sometimes even from inside his cell.
And you know what? The breakthrough, when it finally came, was pure luck. One day, he just fumbled a piece of his latest mixture, rubber mixed with sulfur, and it landed on a hot stove. But instead of melting into that familiar gooey mess, it just kind of charred, like leather. It became tough, but it was still flexible. He had accidentally stumbled onto the answer.
So what actually happened on that stove? Well, the heat made the sulfur form these tiny microscopic bridges between all those long polymer chains. So instead of loose spaghetti strands that could just slide past each other, they were now all tied together in a strong, flexible network. He called the process vulcanisation, and it transformed rubber from a weird novelty into the literal backbone of the Industrial Revolution.
You know, despite his genius, Goodyear's story is actually pretty tragic. He spent every last penny he had defending his patents and died with over $200,000 of debt. That's about $7.7 million in today's money. And the Goodyear Tire Company? It was founded 38 years after he died. He had nothing to do with it. So Goodyear's discovery lit a fire. Suddenly, there was this insatiable global demand for rubber. And this kicked off a massive scramble to control the supply. A scramble that led to a decision that made rubber cheap, but also incredibly fragile. See, originally, pretty much all rubber came from wild trees, scattered all over the Amazon rainforest. But then, in 1876, an Englishman named Henry Wickham smuggled 70,000 rubber tree seeds out of Brazil. Those seeds were used to start massive plantations all across Southeast Asia. Brazil's industry just collapsed. But here's the problem, the real ticking time bomb. Nearly all of those millions upon millions of trees were grown from that tiny handful of seeds. They were all basically clones.
Now, jump ahead a few decades. The car guy, Henry Ford, was not happy that the British had a monopoly on rubber, so he decided to build his very own supply chain. He bought a gigantic piece of land in the Amazon, built a bizarre American-style town called Fordlandia, and planted millions of rubber trees. But Ford's huge ambition was about to run headfirst into the rubber tree's greatest natural enemy.
That's how someone described the South American leaf blight. See, out in the wild Amazon, the rubber trees are all spread out, so the fungus can't easily jump from one to the next.
But in Ford's plantation, where you have millions of genetically identical trees packed tightly together, oh, it spread like wildfire. The entire project was destroyed. And it's the perfect, catastrophic example of the danger of a monoculture.
And that exact same vulnerability now applies to the entire planet. Today, over 90% of all our natural rubber comes from those same genetically identical plantations in Southeast Asia, a part of the world where that leaf blight fungus hasn't reached. Yet. If it ever gets there, we are in serious trouble.
Okay, so you're probably thinking, wait a minute, can't we just make this stuff in a lab? Why not just use synthetic rubber? And that's a great question. We've actually had to do it before. During World War II, Japan's conquest of Asia cut the U.S. off from 97% of its rubber supply, forcing America to basically invent an entire industry from scratch.
And they did it. With a government investment that would be about $11 billion today, that's a third of what they spent on the Manhattan Project, the U.S. created a synthetic rubber industry almost overnight. But even though synthetic rubber is everywhere now, there are some absolutely critical things where it just can't replace the real deal.
And the difference really comes down to one incredible superpower that only natural rubber has. It's something called strain crystallization.
This is so cool. When you stretch natural rubber, its polymer chains are so perfect that they actually line up and lock together into these tiny, incredibly hard crystal structures, right at the point of stress. The material literally reinforces itself to stop tiny cracks from growing. Think about that. The more you pull on it, the stronger it gets. Synthetic versions just aren't perfect enough at the molecular level to pull this off.
And that is why you cannot land a 600-ton jumbo jet on synthetic tires. They would just disintegrate from the stress and the heat. Only natural rubber can handle it. And it's not just airplanes. We're talking about tires for heavy trucks, essential seals in our infrastructure, train suspensions, critical medical supplies like surgeon's gloves. We absolutely take it for granted, but this one material underpins almost everything.
So here's what you should really take away from all this. Our push for a hyper-efficient global supply chain has accidentally created a single, catastrophic point of failure. Our entire modern world is balanced on the hope that a tiny, microscopic fungus never, ever catches a flight from South America to Southeast Asia.
You know, when Henry Ford built Fordlandia, botanists warned him about the blight, and he just ignored them. Today, we know the danger is out there, but our system is just as vulnerable. It's a pretty sobering thought, isn't it? It just goes to show you that sometimes the biggest threats are the ones hiding in plain sight.